There are two ways to increase your top line revenue: sell more items or sell items for more money. Today, we're going to talk through which works best for you, how you can model different outcomes, and potentially predict the future. Hello, and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. Before we get started, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Spot On, who provide a great modern POS solution for the bar and restaurant industry, and Starfish, who use AI to turn your books into actionable steps to increase profits. So today we're talking about pricing strategy. We've spent a lot of time on the podcast discussing costs and cost control and controlling the controllables and all of that sort of good stuff. But today we're going to talk about pricing strategy and top line revenue. And not necessarily things you can do to improve it. We'll talk on that some. But more what we're going to discuss is theory and how to think through, should I increase volume here? Should I increase prices? What are the things you need to take into account? And mostly what we're going to actually focus on is the relationship between volume and price, because that relationship is what determines your top line revenue. So when we think about growing a business, what is growth? Let's start with that question. What is growth? Well, growth, when most people use it, means one of two things. We've increased our revenue or we've increased our profits. Now, normally, especially in small business, we want those to go hand in hand. But when you think about the broader business landscape, growth in revenue does not always equal growth in profits. Growth in profits does not always equal growth in revenue. And so you can have growth as a business and actually make less money. And a good example of a company that has huge growth but doesn't actually make any money or didn't make any money for a long time would be like Amazon or any tech company. These guys are reinvesting their revenue. They are constantly expanding their business, reaching more people, moving more units, having more subscribers. But that doesn't actually mean that they made more profit. If you look at a lot of tech companies, especially in the early years, they made little to no money, if not lost a bunch of money, but still had growth on the top line. Obviously, Amazon or Facebook or Instagram, when it was starting out, all have a lot of outside money from investors, and they did not have a real reason to need profit because they could raise additional capital to continue their growth. But for bars, especially independent bar owners, you need the profit because the profit is how you live. So in bars, when we think growth, while growth in a general business sense can just be an increase of revenue and negative profit, growth that we're looking for in the bar business tends to be growth of revenue that equals growth of profits. And again, that's because the profits are what we take home. Now, one of the ways that we can do this is a price increase, and we'll get into talking about price increases and how those affect this scenario. But one of the reasons why I'm having this conversation this week is because we're about a month away from the end of the year. And at least for me, I always adjusted prices January 1st. It was a natural break point in people's minds. It was new year, new prices. Customers, for whatever reason in my experience, are a little bit psychologically less likely to freak out if you raise prices at the beginning of the year. Yeah, they'll still freak out. But for whatever reason, psychologically, new year, new prices, they seem to be a little bit more elastic when it comes to their ability to pay more money. Now, the other reason why I want to have this conversation now is because the end of the year is a time to reflect on your prior year and forecast your future year. So when you're looking at things that went well last year, on things that you want to capitalize on last year, obviously, I think we all want to grow revenue in the future and not just cut costs as a way to grow our bottom line. So this is a great time to reflect and to start to lay the foundation for what you're going to do in 2025. Now, to go through this conversation, right? So we're talking about how to grow top line growth and increase revenue And as I mentioned, revenue is not necessarily the same as profit. But when we increase revenue, we almost always increase profit in the bar business. So let's start by talking about revenue. What is revenue? So I think we all know this, but revenue is the money that comes in the door. Whatever you charge people, that is your revenue. Now, revenue in and of itself is the consequence of two elements. There are two things that play into revenue: the volume of items you sell and what you charge for those items. So volume and price. Volume, how much you sell; price, what you charge. Now, volume and price, when we think about the way those two elements affect our revenue, they can have different relationships. So, for instance, a lot of times when we can raise prices on an item and then we sell less of it. So price goes up, volume goes down. At the same time, if we have a special on something, so we're decreasing the price on that item, we see volume go up. So frequently these are inverse relationships where we increase or decrease price and we see volume move in the opposite direction. Now, a lot of that comes down though to customer perception. And so this is a story I've told on the podcast before, but it bears repeating because it is, to me, the best example of customer perception of price. One of the bars I had, and this was years ago, and I forget the exact number, so we'll just be close. But I want to say I charged $12 for a bucket of beer. And I heard from my regulars all the time, they would either be very happy about a $12 bucket of beer or complain greatly about a $12 bucket. Well, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, most of my competitors in the local area were charging $10 for a bucket of beer. So I was $2 more expensive. So on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, what did I see? Well, my price was higher than my competitors, so my volume was lower than my competitors. Now, conversely, come Friday, Saturday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all those places that were charging $10 for a bucket Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, were now charging $15 for a bucket. I, rather than play this price up and down volume game, charge $12 all the time. And so Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I saw my volume in beer buckets go up because my price still at $12 was now $3 cheaper than the market. So in a way, even though I never changed the price of an item in my bar, not once, it was $12 every day of the week. It's what I like to call an everyday special. It's a good deal all the time, not a great deal. It's only some of the time. And so if we look at my price versus volume relationship in the first part of the week, my price was higher than the competition, which caused me to have a lower volume of sales. But on every sale, I did make more money. We were selling the same products and I was getting $2 more for those products than they were. Now, on the weekend, the opposite is true. I had a higher volume because I had a lower price than the competition, and they were making more money on their buckets of beer on the weekend. Now, I never had enough information from my competitors to run all the data and really understand if I was winning or losing in that scenario, in that battle between price and volume across multiple bars in the market. But customer perception is the factor that's going to change that volume. People think they're getting a really good deal, they tend to buy more. If people think they're getting not as great of a deal, they tend to buy less. But price and volume are inextricably linked. Now, beyond the relationship between price and volume when it dictates revenue, right? So revenue is price plus volume. When we think about our pricing and how we're approaching our pricing, the theory and the philosophy of pricing, another relationship we need to look at is the relationship of revenue and cost, because we know volume and price are what can drive our revenue, but what does revenue cost us? Because if our profit margin across the entire bar is, say, 15%, an increase in revenue of $100 does not necessarily come with a 15% increase in cost. And that's because our costs they fall into three essentially different categories. And a lot of times in the restaurant business or the bar business, we're going to talk about controllable and non-controllable costs. And that's a good way to look at it. But what matters from a theory and philosophy end is fixed or variable or semi-variable costs. So most of the time when we talk about non-controllable costs, we're talking about things like rent, insurance, things that managers can't really control day to day. And those are our fixed costs. Those are the costs that are the same whether we open the door and sell a beer or we leave the door locked and closed. We have those costs. Now, our controllable costs are going to be divided up between variable and semi-variable costs. So a variable cost is where we have a direct correlation between sales volume and the cost. And a semi-variable cost is where we have a partially direct correlation. A portion of that expense is fixed, and a portion of that expense will vary based upon our volume. So let me give you a few examples here. So a great example of variable cost is, say, the cost for a bottle of beer. And let's say a bottle of beer costs $1 and I sell it for $4. I have a 25% beer cost. Every bottle of beer I sell will cost $1. There's no way that I can avoid that cost. That is a variable cost that always exists with the sale of a beer. So regardless of anything else, anytime I sell a beer, so if I increase the volume of beer I sell or I increase the price of the beer, however I'm driving revenue for that beer, every time I sell it, it's going to cost me $1. Period. End of story. Now, a semi-variable cost, I like to think of them a lot of times as stair-step costs. And the perfect example here is labor. So say you have 5 table sections that you know that one of your servers can handle 5 tables or 10 tables. I'm just using this as an example, but a server can handle 5 tables. Whether a server is handling 1 table or 3 tables, which would be that change in volume that's going to determine our revenue, I still only need 1 server. But as soon as I hit table 6, now I need 2 servers. So rather than my cost increasing across all tables, I pay the same amount for 0 tables served or 5 tables served. But then when I hit table 6, my cost goes up, and it's going to cost me the same amount to serve 6 tables to 10 tables. And then table 11, my cost will go up again. Now, why is it important to understand this relationship between revenue and cost? Because when we look at revenue and cost, you realize that efficiency is one of the keys to increasing revenue the most. Now, why is that true? Because if I only have the cost, if I only have beer cost increasing because I can move another beer across the bar, I can sell another beer, that costs me only the beer cost. If I don't need additional labor, if I don't need changes to my facility, if I don't need additional tech, if I don't need anything else, but I can sell 1 more beer using labor I already have, from product I already have, stored in a cooler I already have, all I've done is increase revenue. And I've increased revenue where that $4 beer, $4 in revenue, my only additional cost associated with that $4 in revenue is $1 in beer cost. So of that $4, I'm putting $3 directly to the bottom line. Oftentimes, this cost-revenue relationship can help you identify, if I do this option, I get 75% directly to the bottom line, whereas if I do a different option, maybe I only get 30% directly to the bottom line. So it can help you realize where you can laser focus yourself in increasing volume to positively impact your revenue. So revenue goes up, cost will always go up, but in some instances, cost goes up less, depending on how we've generated that additional revenue, which way we've increased our volume to do that. Now let's talk about the relationship between price and cost, or price and revenue to an extent, because we know with revenue, we have our 2 factors, volume and price. So volume, we explained, costs go up when volume goes up, but costs go up less than your increase in volume, so you get a higher margin on the bottom line. But what happens when price goes up? Because price has no impact on cost. So instead of charging $4 for a beer that cost me $1, say I charge $5 for a beer that cost me $1. Well, that $1, because I haven't increased my volume, I haven't changed anything about my cost structure, that $1 will pretty much fall directly to the bottom line. So we have no increase when we increase price, we have no corresponding increase in variable or semi-variable cost. As a matter of fact, if anything, we have a decrease in semi or variable cost on a percentage basis, because that additional revenue will offset those costs greater, right? If we're charging $4 for a beer that costs $1, we have a 25% beer cost. Charge $5 for a beer that costs us $1, we have a 20% beer cost. So increasing price is the easiest way to bring money straight to the bottom line. But we have to be careful here, because if we increase price too much, beyond the elasticity of a market, beyond what people want to pay for an item, we're not going to sell it. And then it doesn't matter what we're charging for it, because our volume is zero. So our revenue is zero. Or our volume is way down, so our revenue is lower than it was before we raised the price. So if you're following all of this, I know this is kind of crazy talking about volume and price and revenue and all these different ways to think, but essentially, this all comes down to one thing. Growing revenue is the art. And it really is an art, not a science. The science is how we run the data, but the art is the psychology and how you sell price increases and how you get people to purchase more. The real answer to increasing your top line, to increasing your bottom line in turn, is to perfectly find the balance between price and volume. When you can find that balance, you're going to win. Now, interestingly, if we look at the last couple years, one thing that you hear from a lot of folks in the industry is, I'm making more money. My guest check average is way up, but my volume is down. Now, on one hand, that's concerning because, well, if volume continues to go down forever, eventually you don't make money, okay, and you're out of business. On the other hand, though, that's kind of a good thing, because here's what's going on, right? We're making more revenue and in turn, more profit on less guests. So we're making more money and working less. In business in general would be a win-win, right? We often don't look at it that way in our industry, but that is a win-win. And so if you can get more revenue from fewer transactions that produce more profit, great. Now the question becomes, how do we increase the volume so that we can get even more revenue at those new higher margins that really supercharge our... So it's all about this balancing act. Now, when we talk the balance between price and volume to dictate your revenue, price is always easier to control than volume. Price, you can go to your POS system right now, increase the price on every drink you sell by 50 cents, and it's done. Literally. You can do it in a matter of minutes, depending upon the system you're using, and you've controlled your price. And that means a lot of folks, especially ones that are new to the industry or not thinking things through all the way, will just jump on a price increase as a way to improve their bottom line. And it should, right? But if your volume goes down, at some point it doesn't. So you can increase prices to where you're in line with the market. And that's where we go back to this bucket of beer example, right? My competitors sometimes were $10, sometimes were $15. I was $12 every day. It had positive and negative impacts on the volume I sold based on what my competitors were charging. So the overall market is going to put some price control on you when you offer commodity goods. And if you think about the bar business, what do we sell that's a commodity? Well, all our cocktails essentially are commodity unless you're a very high-end cocktail bar with specialty cocktails and highly trained bartenders that are doing special things. Because a Jack and Coke is a Jack and Coke is a Jack and Coke. And yeah, I might have a little bit of a better pour. I might use a little less mixer. It may taste stronger. There are little differentiating factors in there. But a Jack and Coke is basically a commodity. A Miller Lite's absolutely a commodity. Tastes the same out of any bottle, anywhere you buy in the world, anytime. So that is a commodity product. So on commodity products, we can only charge so much before we hit a market price value that we can't go above. Now, where we can increase price a lot easier is with our products that are less of a commodity. So like I mentioned, if you're a very high-end cocktail bar and you're doing specialty cocktails that other people in your market aren't doing, and there's a demand for them, you can charge basically anything you want because there's no market price dictating what you charge. Now, at some point, you're going to charge more than the market will bear, but you have more elasticity in your market because what you're selling is less of a commodity. The other place where almost every bar has a chance to play outside of this commodity space with their pricing is on food. And so if you have better food than most people, you can charge a better price than most people, even though better food does not necessarily cost more on your food cost end. So you can strategically use food as a great way to increase volume and charge a higher price because food is less of a commodity product. Now, obviously, if you're selling frozen mozzarella sticks from Cisco straight out of the bag into the fryer, that's a commodity. But if you're doing something like taking cheese, cutting it up, hand breading it, and frying it, that's less of a commodity. So your ability to move price is somewhat based on how much of your item is a commodity. Now, like I said, price control is easy. Volume control, not so much. So increasing volume is always going to require more than a simple decision like price. And volume comes largely through perceived value. Are you giving people a good deal? And do they perceive what you're selling as a good deal? Now, the number one tool to use is menu engineering. Because what is menu engineering at the end of the day? It's a matrix of contribution margin and popularity, which we could call price and volume. Menu engineering is a tool that allows you to map this, look at each individual item you have, whether it's food or liquor, whichever part of your menu or your offerings you're doing menu engineering with, and really try to mathematically determine where that best fit is between price and volume. So menu engineering is a great tool to maximize your revenue because we're looking at the two components of revenue, price and volume. Now, here are a few things to look out for whenever you're looking at driving your revenue higher. One is your product mix. Because like I just said, if you're more on the commodity end, you have less price elasticity than if you have more unique products. If, regardless of the product, you shoot too high above market prices, things are not going to sell. Your volume will not increase. And so you're going to have trouble driving revenue that way. Now, there are two scenarios that can be could look good on the surface, but you need to always check them. And that's when you have a volume increase and a profit decrease, or you have a price increase and a volume decrease. So how do we have a volume increase and a profit decrease? Well, that's when we're shifting. We're changing what people purchase. That's why it's always important to look at our P-mix and what we're selling. But when our pricing and our volume strategy changes what people buy and encourages them to sub out an item where we were selling lower volume items that we made more money on, and now they're switching to higher volume items that we make less money on. And so we've moved them from buying low volume to high volume, but we've moved them from buying high profit items to low profit items. Now, oftentimes volume will make up for that profit differential. However, sometimes it doesn't. So whenever you're increasing your volume on your more commodity type items, make sure it's not taking away from the volume on your more specialty items, the items that you're making better profit on, because you can hurt yourself without the numbers actually looking like you're hurting yourself. Now, the second thing to look out for here is price increase and volume decrease, right? At some point, you charge so much, you sell way less. Now, obviously, like I said, if you can sell 100 beers for $4, that's $400 in revenue. If you can sell 80 beers for $5, that is $400 worth of revenue. And 80 beers at $5 will make you more profit than 100 beers at $4. So you're winning there. But that's because the price increase and the volume decrease went hand in hand. And so we're still having the same revenue on the top line, but we have a larger bottom line. But if you increase your price too much, your volume will decrease to the point that you're actually making less profit. So it's very important to monitor that. So just to recap this off for you guys real quick. Revenue, two things go into your revenue: price and volume. Those are your two levers you can pull to change your revenue. And it is an art to balance those two. You always need to balance the volume you're selling and the price you're charging. And there are different mathematical things that happen in your books and with your profits depending upon your price and your volume. The other thing to remember here, like the example I just used of raise the price per beer by $1 and lose 20% volume, but it's the same revenue. You can have the cheapest thing or the most expensive and make the same money. So we're worried about profit at the end of the day. Increased revenue does not always mean increased profit. Decreased revenue and increased profit can go hand in hand. It's weird, but it can happen. So make sure you have a consistent strategy when it comes to your pricing model and how you're trying to drive your volume in order to increase your top line revenue. Now, before we go today, we do have a listener question. If you've been listening to the show for a while and you would like to ask a listener question, go down in the show notes. It says text the show. You can click right there. It comes to me. I will read it on the next episode. You can also send comments about the show to me through there. Just so you know, though, I can't respond. So that's why we read these on the shows. The question I got this week was about keg boxes. It says, I am about to purchase my draft keg boxes. I've chosen 2 true 3-door keg boxes. I need info and advice on tap towers. I'd like to do 6 taps on both sides or possibly 8 on both sides for a total of 12 to 16. Now, I'm not sure here, from the way this is written, full disclosure, because I can't respond to these text messages. He's buying 2 true 3-doors, and then he says he'd like to do 6 taps on both sides. And so I'm not sure if he's talking about 6 taps per box or 12, 8 on both sides. I'm not sure what he's asking, but let's break this down here. So a 3-door keg box is generally set up to have 4 kegs in it. At a 3-door box, normally has 4 kegs. Now you can put 6 in there pretty easily and do a mix of like 3 half barrels and 3 1/6 or quarter barrels. Works really well. That's what I did for years. I used the half barrels for my larger beers, your Miller Lite, Bud Light, Coors Light, Budweiser, what have you. And then the 6 barrels, quarter barrels, those were my specialty beers, whether it was Bell's, Founders, local, what have you there. How many taps you can actually do? You got to kind of plan this out. So turning a 3-door keg box that has 4 taps into a 3-door keg box with 6 taps, not difficult. Like I said, you can still use half barrels. One of the things that you have to keep in mind, like there's a lot of pressure sometimes to have more taps. But when you add more taps, you go from half barrels to having to do 6 barrels. And 6 barrels per ounce are going to cost you way more for the beer. So your cost is going to be higher. Now on craft, you can charge a higher price, but you definitely do not want to be doing your higher volume beers, your Miller Lite, Coors Light, or anything like that in a 6 barrel. You're going to change it all the time. It's just going to be annoying and you're going to spend way too much money. So I personally would never recommend going over 6 taps on a 3-door keg box because that gives you 3 quarter 6 barrels, 3 half barrels. It's a nice mix. In theory, I think you could probably do 8 or 10 6 or quarter barrels. I've never tried it, but it's I'm sure theoretically plausible and something you could do. I'm just not sure why you would, given the cost associated with 6 barrels versus the cost associated with half barrels for beers that you're going to run through a lot. Now, the other thing here too is utilize your draft tags, right? Even if you're going to buy craft beer and all those things, Budweiser, Miller Lite, your Miller guys, your Bud guys, they're going to have draft tags. Use them. Talk to them. See what they think has worked. See what they'll do for you. A lot of times they will set this all up for you if you ask nicely. The last thing I will say on this topic, I like keg boxes. I know a lot of people like the long draw systems. I like keg boxes. They're easier to play with. They're easier to change the number of taps you have. They're easier to work on. And they're easier to get your draft text to do all the work for you. So I do think keg boxes in this case is a great pull. And I think when he says 6 taps on both sides, we mean each keg box would have 6. taps total. So it would have 2 towers on each box, 3 taps per tower. I think that's a phenomenal idea. And the way to go, I think if you start getting to 8, so 4 taps on each tower, you're getting a little excessive, and it's really potentially going to cut into your profits because your cost for a 6 barrel far exceeds your cost for a half barrel when you look at beer cost per ounce. That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.